Other teachers told you that you need to relax your mouth and your tongue. You need to relax your throat. And you need to somehow speak from the chest. But how do you even do that? I mean, in your language, you already feel relaxed, right? So what does that even mean? How can you relax more? Well, I'm here to tell you not to relax your mouth, and definitely don't try to speak from your chest. In fact, the American English schwa sound is not even completely relaxed. It just uses a different mouth posture, which we'll talk about more later, and this in turn creates a different default tension or normal tension of the way you hold your mouth, your tongue, and your throat, and this will then affect all the sounds in the language. Today, you'll learn what's really going on in American English and how you can sound American with just a few small changes. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Hi, I'm Josh, your American English guide, and this is English Hacks Pronunciation, where I help you to sound like a native if you want, and to understand real, natural American speech better. First, I have to tell you that this isn't really about voice placement. In fact, the more that I play with things and I think about this voice placement idea, the more it seems, well, garbage. Now, I do think that there is some truth to it, but the way that it's being taught is backwards, and that doesn't really help a lot of you. It just leaves you confused and not sounding any better. So don't confuse what we're talking about today with voice placement, although it will address that in the process. Okay, so I've used the term mouth posture a few times now, but what exactly does that mean? Well, first, what is posture? For example, right now I am sitting upright, straight. So we would say that I am sitting with good posture. It is the way that I'm holding my body. So that's what we mean when we're talking about mouth posture, also called oral posture. And it simply means how you are holding your mouth, and more broadly, more generally, how you're holding your entire vocal tract. And it's about 90% or so in the tongue, right? How you hold your tongue is going to affect your throat. But this also involves the default or normal tension in your lips, how you hold your lips, and how open your jaw is normally. Some of this is probably starting to sound familiar from other teachers, and that's perfectly fine because they're not completely wrong. But there are some things that I disagree with, and we're going to go and look at all those details. Now, American English is spoken mostly from the center of the mouth, and it's also a little bit down. Remember, we talked about that jaw being a little more open. So for center, a little open, that is the American English schwa sound. One extremely important thing to remember is that when I'm talking about the schwa, this is a full range in American English. And this is actually what I like to call the paradox of the schwa in American English. So there's the really super relaxed, reduced, true schwa sound, which would be like, And again, at least for an American or for an English speaker, it is super, super relaxed. It's not necessarily going to feel relaxed for your language based on how you hold your mouth. But that is what a lot of teachers talk about. Now, there's two other steps here to consider. The first step is what I would say is sort of a clearly produced true schwa sound, and that would be and that is what we're focusing on here as the center of gravity. Now that goes even farther down in American English to that upside down VIPA symbol, and that's pronounced as which is actually kind of hard for me to do in isolation on command, because for this exact reason that I'm talking about, how it's perceived as the same sound basically. But the real secret between these two is that if you have that nice good center of gravity, a nice good clear true schwa sound. And then you hold that, but you just open the jaw more. Okay. That's all I'm doing. I'm not moving anything. I'm not changing anything. I'm holding that same point and just letting the jaw open more. And so it's the more open jaw with that schwa position that creates that new sound. The fact that the center of gravity and the mouth posture in American English is right here and down a little, this actually helps to explain why Americans perceive and all as the same sound through the flow of speech, even though technically and are two different sounds. So I don't want you to get confused by that. Now this creates the idea that the tongue is relaxed, but it's actually not. This is one of the big problems, because if I go and I completely relax my tongue, okay? Give me a second here. It sounds kind of like a schwa, but it's not quite right. It's a little bit off. So we're not completely relaxed. Now, compared to your language, it might be a little more relaxed, but it's actually not about being relaxed. It's about shifting the tension of how you hold your tongue and your jaw and your lips and your throat. Now, you feel relaxed in your language because you're used to holding your tongue a certain way. So when a teacher tells you to relax, you don't really know how to do that. The reality is that all languages and all dialects within a language, because sometimes it's different, like between American English and British English, all languages and dialects do have a little bit of tension through the tongue, but for example, in Spanish, the tongue is actually pushed forward a little bit. Compared to American English, it's actually not pushed forward. We're going to go more into those details in a minute. The point here is that you don't want to completely relax everything. You want to figure out how to shift the basic tension from your language into American English. Okay, so that's mouth posture. That's the first big concept here. But the other big concept, the center of gravity, this is really the key, okay, the core of this hack that will allow you to sound like an American. I found another channel in my research called Improve Your Accent. It's actually a British English channel. And he was talking about why Spanish speakers sound Spanish when they speak English, right? Why they have that Spanish accent. He was talking about Sofia Vergara, and he was talking about how when she's thinking, right, what's the sound that she makes when she's thinking? She makes a sound more like eh. Or in American English, we'd probably say
Chocolate, red velvet, and vanilla.
Now, there's not necessarily just one thinking sound, but that's an important idea. The center of gravity should be around the thinking sound, right? Which is sort of like probably the most common place that a native speaker of a language or a dialect would go to, how their tongue would rest normally, the default tension or mouth posture. But what exactly is the center of gravity? And why is it important? It will in some way affect all the other sounds, consonants and vowels, and how they sound in that particular language or dialect. It sort of bends them toward that center of gravity in some way. I do have a lesson about how there's more than one neutral sounding accent in American English, and this is actually why. If you go to Southern English, or you go to, say, like a Boston accent or something, it still might be based more or less around that schwa, but there's something else happening. The tongue is held in a slightly different way, which then affects the sounds and gives the accent, right? And the way that the mouth moves and stuff through those sounds around that center of gravity helps produce that accent, okay? So most Americans, right, through most parts of the country, with the South being the big exception, most people will sound neutral, even if the exact sounds are a little bit different, like I say think instead of think, right, with E instead of eh, or the cot merger, right? I just say ah, but people who don't have the merger say ah and aw. Even though there are these little differences, most Americans will still sound neutral Because of this mouth posture, we all hold the mouth basically the same way around that center of gravity where the schwa is, without the tongue pushed too far forward, without things too far back, etc., etc. So we have the same type of default tension through the vocal tract, especially through the tongue.
Круто, всем барбер. Круто, всем барбер. They have
qui a une éducation, qui a une éducation.
Now it might be hard to notice because the differences are so small, but all of those were schwa sounds, yet they don't sound exactly the same. And this connects to another idea I've had a while about the quality of a sound in a particular language or dialect. Just because two languages have the same sound, they might even have the same IPA symbol, does not mean that they sound exactly the same. So this isn't an exact science necessarily. It is a tool, a framework, a guideline that will help you to shift the tension in how you hold your tongue especially, but also your jaw and other parts of your vocal tract, so that you can shift from how you hold everything in your language to more closely match how a neutral sounding American speaker would generally hold their mouth and their vocal tract. If you ask another American native speaker if all of this mouth posture stuff is true, they might disagree with me, but there could be two reasons for that. One is because, like, you probably aren't super aware of your mouth and your tongue. The average native isn't super aware of their mouth and their tongue either. For me to notice this center of gravity and how I can sort of feel it through my speech in general, I really have to pay very close attention. And or the second reason, it's definitely possible that what I describe in this lesson isn't exactly the same for everybody. Remember, this is a tool. It is a framework that is going to give you an anchor point, a central reference, so that you can keep that general mouth posture and sort of build on top of it. It just helps make sure that you keep everything more or less in place so that you can sound really, really good like a native. How can you actually use these concepts to sound American? We have 4 key areas. We have the jaw, we have the lips, the tongue, and the throat. And all of these are going to work together in a particular way within a language or dialect. Let's go step by step and look at each of these so that you can put all these pieces together. Now, before we talk about anything, there is one super important thing that you need to do. This will affect everything else that we talk about. There's a video from Idausen Ness on his channel Mimic Method, and Idausen Ness is really the king of pronunciation. Now, in this video, it's called a guided meditation for your mouth. He's gonna walk you through, like, okay, how to feel your lips, feeling different parts of your tongue and stuff like this. And if you do not have this more subtle awareness of what you are doing with your lips and your jaw and your tongue and your throat, you will not get this. But this awareness of how my mouth is moving is one reason why I'm so good at teaching you guys and explaining things to you guys, because I've spent a lot of time, especially between Spanish and English, but also in some other languages, playing with sounds. I'm much more aware than the average person of what is happening inside my mouth. So make sure you watch his video after you finish this lesson, because it will really help you with the exercises that we do later. First is the jaw, and there's a reason why this is first. This is the most important first step. So don't worry about your lips, don't worry about your tongue, don't worry about your throat. Jaw only right now. Now, what you want to do is get your mouth more open. And again, you'll get a lot of this information saying like, oh, you need to relax the mouth, relax the jaw. Okay. Now, if I completely relax my jaw, I'm going to sound something like this. Okay. This is no tension in my jaw. What's actually happening here in your language, and I can't talk for all languages, but it does seem that many languages compared to American English, the mouth is more closed. Okay. Now, all that means is that, right, you have your jaw muscles here. You can open your jaw more. You can close your jaw more. Now, within a language or dialect, of course, the jaw will move a little bit, but in general, the jaw stays in place. Now, if we are very clearly saying some of these open sounds like ah or ah, the jaw will sort of get out of place, open a bit more. That's fine. It's not a problem. But generally through speech, even very clear speech, what's going to happen is, see, if I put my fingers here, my jaw, you can see a little bit of motion, how it's moving my hand, but there's actually not a lot of movement, right? So in your language, you're probably used to holding your jaw more like this. There's not a lot of space in the mouth, and we need a lot of space in American English. A lot of space for all of the sounds, not just for the schwa. The space in the mouth is part of the sounds. So that's why opening your jaw more is the first most important step. So don't try to relax your jaw. You want to open it more than you're used to. So if you're normally, say, about right here, open it more. You don't want to go too much. It's just too open. Okay. So it's really a little change, but if your jaw muscles start to hurt, if you try to open your jaw a little more and talk with your jaw more open than you're used to, you should start to feel the jaw muscles start to hurt a little bit, and that means that you should be open enough. Okay, you're doing it right. Now, you might think that you're opening a little more and you might think it's enough, but it probably isn't. Okay, so you have to find just the right balance between opening enough and not opening too much. And again, this is the default, meaning normal way that the jaw is held through most of speech. So it's going to generally stay at that openness. And this is true whether we say E, my tongue comes up, but my jaw doesn't move much. E, there's some movement under here, there's not movement here. Or if I say ooh, my jaw again isn't really moving much. Okay, and these are very closed sounds. If I say ah, little bit of motion. Ah, okay, the jaw isn't going to move very much, so you want that default tension to hold it in place. So the second most important thing is the tongue. Now, I mentioned earlier that about 90% of this is in the tongue, and that's definitely true. So why is the jaw number one and the tongue is number two? Well, as I said, we need more space in the mouth. If you don't have enough space, it doesn't matter what you do, your sounds are going to be at least a little bit off. And American English uses a lot of space in the mouth, even if the lips are more closed. I've talked about in a previous lesson about the W sound, even though the lips come out, the inside of the mouth is actually still very open. So once you get your jaw in place, then you want to focus on the tongue. And this is where we bring in the center of gravity idea. We know that schwa, which is, by the way, the single most common sound in the language, there's a reason for that. The schwa is right in the middle, okay? And it's actually going to be down a little bit, okay? The reason why I say it's down a little bit is because, again, your jaw needs to be open more. So just because if you're in the middle and you say like, that's okay for, sort of like a quick reduction true schwa sound, that upside down E and IPA. If you're speaking quickly, right, we might have the mouth even more closed in really fast speech. We're not going to worry about that right now. If you want to do a nice, good, clear, you need enough space in the mouth. So once you have that space, you want to get that sound in here. Now, I've talked a lot about the schwa, different ways to make it. There's the bowl technique. There's all these different things, but that's the most important thing. You want to find that perfect schwa first, okay? And I cannot emphasize this enough. You want to find a perfect American English sounding schwa. Not just any kind of schwa, specifically an American English sounding Now there are two main obstacles to this. Number one is the openness in the mouth. Number two is the back of the tongue, especially if you speak a language like Russian or Spanish, where the tongue is actually pushed forward more. You need to get that back of the tongue out of the way. You're not trying to push it down or back or anything like that, but it does need to not be pushed forward. It's a little shift. It's just a little shift. The back of the tongue can really get in the way and cause problems with getting this sound. And there's many different things that can go wrong here. It could be a little too high up. It could be a little too far back. Again, you're not trying to push it or anything like that, but based on how you normally hold the back of your tongue, maybe you don't have enough space. Okay, that's one thing to consider. Make sure you have the space back there. In American English, we just want a little tiny bit of basic tension in the back of the tongue. You might have to play with that a little bit, but it should help you a lot. Okay, so we know the jaw needs to be more open. We know that we don't want the back of the tongue to be in the way, especially not pushing forward in the mouth. But the key to this nice clear schwa sound itself, right? How do you actually make that once you take care of the jaw and the back of the tongue? You want to feel that there's sort of a dip of pressure here in the middle, and you're not trying to push your tongue down. Okay, that's a big mistake. You're not trying to say like, Okay, don't try to push the tongue down like that. You want to let it set down. It settles down with the jaw. Okay, so the jaw opens more. That's what brings it down. You're not trying to push it down. Okay, but you should feel a little bit of pressure in here, almost like a little dip. And what you want to imagine is that there's like a ball, right? A little rubber ball right there in your mouth that's going to help keep your jaw more open. And it's going to help you feel this little dip here. So imagine there's a ball, okay? And as you go from sound to sound to sound, this ball will sort of shift. Sometimes it gets a little squished, like going up to E. Sometimes maybe it'll roll a little forward or something like with ah, okay? But it's always going to be around that center of gravity. And so you need to get that right shape. It's going to take some practice. It's going to take some feedback, but you want to sound exactly like this. Why is that so super important? I said before that the center of gravity will sort of affect all the other sounds, all the vowels, all the consonants. Now what I mean by that is, let's say if we're talking about vowels, for example. So we say E, okay? Now you can look on the vowel chart, and we know E is made with the front of the tongue, okay? It's going to be high in the mouth, okay? Again, you don't want to necessarily have your jaw more closed, but it's going to be high in the mouth. Except what you might do in your language is you might not have a whole lot of space in the mouth. Maybe the middle and the back of the tongue is also high, and that leaves very little space through the whole mouth, especially if your jaw is more closed. And you say something like E, E, E. Now that sounds pretty much like, very, very similar E sound. E is not usually the biggest problem. It sounds very similar between languages, but it doesn't quite sound American. And the reason why is because we still place it here in front of the tongue, very high in the mouth, but the middle of the tongue and the back of the tongue are actually lower. There's more space back here. Okay, so that's again the jaw, there's more space. But number two, I have to pay attention to this, but I can actually feel a little bit of tension extending out from that basic schwa position into that E. That's the center of gravity. Now again, that's not a big deal for E necessarily, but for sounds like eh, which is a difficult sound for many people, sound like right? What I call the high schwa, like in book, or even the and then some of the consonants as well. If I talk about the T sound, so we know the T comes up and closes. There's a little bit of flatness. We're not touching the teeth. And we release t, t, t. Okay. Now, if I pay very close attention, I notice that as I close that T, okay, if I do this very slowly and I let the air build, okay, I feel that pressure before I release the T, I can actually notice that there's a little bit of tension more or less around that schwa pushing at the base of that T. Okay, so again, we're sort of attached to that center of gravity, and then when we release, t, t. This also explains why in English, right, when we release a consonant sound, we say t, m, s, d, l, r, b, k. It all goes into that that default mouth posture, okay, that center of gravity. And remember we talked about that ball and how it can kind of roll a little bit. So you won't always feel, sometimes you're doing a sound, it won't feel exactly right here. Sometimes it feels like it's maybe shifted a little farther forward, maybe a little farther back, depending on exactly what sound you're doing and what part of the tongue you're using to make that sound. But there will always be some sort of very small little line of tension that goes back either to that schwa or around that schwa in the middle of the mouth, or as you're moving between sounds, right, you're either going to keep hitting that default placement, you're going to keep passing by it, or you're going to get close to it, right? It doesn't always go right in. Like if I say D and E, right, the D is here, the E is here, I'm not going to open into I'm not going to say D, right? That would be wrong. But there's a little bit of tension when I release the D. There's that little line of tension still as I'm in the E. D, D, D. And again, the back here is more open, okay? So you don't want to say D, D, D. See, that immediately gives you an accent just by having this more closed, even if the D is in a good place and the E is in a good place. So in a couple lessons, I'm going to be making the vowel master class, and I'm going to talk about not only all the vowel sounds, but how this mouth posture ties into all of those sounds so that you can really make sure you're making all of them properly. And one little extra detail that might be important depending on your native language is that, especially if your language has a jaw position that is a little more closed, you want to pay attention to the muscle under here. And in general, this is going to be sort of pushed around by what the tongue is doing, okay? And that's fine, okay? It's not about trying to push this out or tighten it or loosen it or anything like that. But there's this little muscle down under here, and it's like a seatbelt, okay? So imagine if you're a Russian speaker and you have this, much more closed position. Your lips are tighter, your jaw is more closed, your tongue is pushed forward a bit. This seatbelt is going to kind of be tighter, right? So it's like you're in the Russian car and you have like no space to move, right? It's really tight, and it helps hold your tongue up into place, okay? In American English, because we're more open and we might be a little bit more relaxed, this muscle here needs to be maybe not quite so tight. So it's still a seatbelt, right? There's still tension there, but you don't want it to be super, super tight, okay? And what this is going to do is, right, if you're opening your mouth and you have, you feel that pressure there, but you're saying something like, okay? It might be with the back of the tongue, or it might be that this is still too tight and it's sort of pushing your tongue up even though your jaw is open. So you really want to let the tongue set down into the jaw. And so there's a lot of pieces here. There's the back of the tongue, there's the jaw openness, right? There's the feeling that little dip there and all these things. And so it's a little complex, right? I said it's not going to necessarily be easy, but this is one more little piece. It's more of like a small little extra detail that, if you get the back right and you get that dip right and your jaw is open enough, you're probably going to sound pretty good. But if you still don't sound perfect, this is one thing to consider, and trying to sort of let the tongue settle down a little bit more into the jaw. Again, not trying to push it down, not trying to open your jaw even more, but just letting this seatbelt sort of not be so tight. Now, the third most important area is the throat. And this is where I'm going to clash with some other teachers. And that's fine. We just disagree. Don't speak from your chest. We're going to ignore that idea. Okay. So what's going on in your throat? Number one is directly tied to the tongue. And this is another reason why I say it's 90% in the tongue. It's not about trying to place your voice lower. It's about letting the tongue settle into the right position with the right amount of tension. So if you speak a language where your tongue is actually pushed forward a little bit in the mouth, then what's going to happen is that is going to pull this up. Try to consciously push your tongue farther forward. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's right or not, just push your tongue farther forward and try to feel. You can put your hand here, okay, and try to feel what happens with your throat. Okay, you should feel that things kind of move up. So if I'm up more like this, okay, my voice immediately starts to get kind of higher, start to get a little bit of a different sound because I'm pushing my tongue forward. Okay, now if I try to push my tongue down and back, that's actually going to affect things too, which is why you don't want to push your tongue down and back, because that can help give you an artificial or fake deepness. So again, it's not about pushing the tongue down and back. Just like with this schwa, the center of gravity, you don't want to push the tongue down. Okay, when the jaw is more open, that's going to give you more space. It's going to sort of allow the tongue to sink down. It's going to give you more space back here, right? Which is also very important. We need space through the mouth. We need more space through here. In your language, if your jaw is more closed, your tongue is pushed forward, you have less space in here. Okay, so it's all about getting more space and not pushing it, but shifting into a new normal tension of how you hold your tongue and your throat and all that stuff. So the tongue will do most of the throat work. If you get your tongue right, if you get that mouth posture right in that schwa with the back of the tongue out of the way, not too much extra tension there. You might kind of have to relax it a little bit, but don't try to push it out of the way. If you get that right, that will take care of most of the throat. Now there are also little muscles behind your Adam's apple that kind of go around more or less. Or at least that's how it feels. And you probably aren't conscious of these right now. I wasn't conscious of them until recently. But if you tighten them, okay, you get this sort of weird sound. And if you try to push them out, you get sort of a different weird sound. So depending on how you hold that as an individual and or based on your language, that is going to have a little effect too. So that's something else you might need to play with a bit. But the other really, really, really big thing is your breath. It seems to me that, say for example, in Spanish and in Russian, this is a little more closed, right? Because everything is sort of, right, this is kind of pulled up a bit because the tongue is pulled forward, there's less space in the mouth. And so it actually gives you less space here. And it helps to constrict or tighten in that airflow. And so that's why, like in Spanish and Russian, right, you kind of hear it sounds kind of like this, like there's not a lot of breathing out, right? And it sounds pretty good, but it kind of like it feels like the sounds are trapped in the throat. Where normally if I speak, okay, you can hear a little bit more airflow. Not like this, right? And I've talked about breathing and how to breathe sounds out before, but you want to make sure that you're breathing enough and that you have enough space through here to breathe enough, because even just not breathing enough, if everything else is perfect, if you're not breathing enough, it's not going to quite sound right. And then lastly is the lips. Now this is a smaller detail. The throat is also kind of a smaller detail. It is important. It will affect your exact sound. So many teachers will tell you that you need to relax the lips more. That is, I would say, generally true. I think many languages have a little bit more tension in the lips. The way that the lips are used might be a little different. The sides of your lips are one area. This part of your lips and how you can, all right, move them around, that's another thing. So I've talked about using the lips in various sounds like ooh, oh, ow, the w, w, or the sh, which isn't required to do that, or the right? The lips can come up. So there might be some muscles that maybe you need to develop a little bit, but just the general way that you hold your lips is also important. But you want to be careful here, because a lot of teachers tell you how, like, for example, with E, right, they say E, or you should smile when you say E, or when you say ah, right, ah, mouth gets very open. If we are super clearly enunciating or we're exaggerating, then definitely, yes, we will open up more. But generally, they actually don't open too much to the side. So you actually don't want to worry about your lips coming out too much. There should be, again, just a little bit of tension on the sides. You don't want to have them be pulled in and tight like this. Okay, and don't pay attention here. This is pulling everything in. See, so even though I'm keeping everything else the same, obviously I sound a little weird. So now you also don't want to be doing this, right? Or your lips are out and you're kind of like this all the time, right? That gives you a weird sound too. So it'll open and close a little bit depending on the sound. You don't really have to worry too much about it. Just make sure that they're not too tense, just a little bit of tension on the corners there. For the rest of it, it depends on what you're doing, right? P, lips come together, push out. F, the bottom lip comes up. As I say with maybe the lips will come out a bit. W, lips come out. So again, always keeping more space in the mouth as well. The lips are more of a minor point. Just make sure that they're not too tense and that you have enough mobility. If your mouth is more closed like this, you're not going to be moving your lips very much at all. That's probably why they're a little tighter in some languages. So in review, open your jaw more, get that ball, have that pressure. Always be trying to feel that line of pressure through all your sounds. Get more space through the back, get enough breath flow going, and get the lips to where they're not too tense. That is the posture, the oral posture, the vocal tract posture for American English in general. And again, I cannot emphasize enough, jaw openness, mouth posture with the tongue around that schwa. Get that. Those are the two biggest, most important things. But what do you think about all this? Does this make more sense than what you've heard from other people? If you have any questions, of course, let me know. Thank you so very much for watching another English Hacks lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.